Hello. Oh, sorry. Why isn't this plugging in? Hello? Oh my goodness. Sorry. Hello everyone. You may be able to hear my little problem over in the next room. Thought I'd finally gotten her to sleep. She's been a bit of a trouble today. And sorry. Okay, so today I am looking on this little sketchbook spread. So I've tried to show you my reference, which is this goldenrod, piece of goldenrod. Welcome back, Ember.
Hi, sorry, I was going to take her outside.
Oh, thank you.
I didn't realize your door was open.
Yeah. Let me that. Hi, Ember. Bye, Ember. No you. No you. Have a nice outside with Debbie.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my helpful little studio assistant there. There we go. Okay. So hopefully that's all set up now. So I am experimenting with working in a combination of graphite and watercolor to create this goldenrod in this sketchbook. So this is for a sketchbook exchange. So this is not one of my sketchbooks. This belongs to a friend of mine who I've gotten permission to show her initial spread because it's gorgeous. So after doing a sketchbook exchange with the now former Botanical Artists of Canada, I was speaking about that to some of my internet friends, and we decided to do a worldwide, like, sort of nature themed, but not necessarily just a sketchbook exchange, just more of a general exchange. Although a lot of the artists participating do nature journaling and botanical or animal art. And so this sketchbook belongs to Bindi in Australia, and her initial spread, which I've gotten permission to share, is right here. So this is absolutely gorgeous. Not my work and not my sketchbook, but she built this initial spread. I really love this cutout. And then there's a poem here. So I'm the third person working in this sketchbook, and this is my spread that I started a few weeks ago now. And so I'm experimenting. I'm painting Canada Goldenrod, and I wanted to focus on something that's typically Canadian that you definitely wouldn't find in Australia. So So yeah, so this is Canada Goldenrod, and specifically it's in winter. So these, here, if I turn this around, these pods dry, these flowers dry out. They make these really cool white seed head things with some dried foliage. I find that it's actually super interesting and really beautiful in a very different way from what we see in the summer. So these grow all over the ditches around where I live, but you wouldn't find them necessarily elsewhere in the world. And certainly in a climate that doesn't have like a real winter, you can get these dried seed pods. So that's why I chose this, and I've been experimenting with ways of rendering these patterns using a mix of watercolor and graphite to create some of the textures, and using very granulating watercolors to enhance those textures and create like some of the very subtle color variation that we see in these. So I started this on stream a few weeks ago. I have done a little bit of work on this since then, but not very much. And so now I'm continuing that and hopefully getting back in the habit of live streaming. This year has been tough. Really not sad to be moving on at all. And hopefully next year will bring lots of positive things. Most recently, my cat Neuron just had a veterinary emergency. So I have a puppy, Ember, who you just heard, as well as a cat who's now a senior. He's almost 11 years old now, and he's a little chunky, and recently he had a urinary blockage, perhaps due to the stress of having recently added a dog to the house, or the fact that we recently had our plumbing, our drainage, just our main drain just backed up. So Neuron trained himself to pee in the toilet many years ago, but his regular toilet was unavailable for some time, and it's available again, but you know, the whole downstairs is sort of messed up now. So he's had a lot going on, and apparently it's frequently stress related, but he had a major urinary blockage, and so he was unable to go pee on his own for a little while. He had to go into an emergency vet. He needed to have his bladder drained under general anesthetic, and then stay under observation over Christmas. So we've been trying to keep the two animals apart to keep Neuron calm. He's on a special diet as well. Plus I still have a puppy who's wonderful, but a huge amount of work, and we're heading into a major home reno. Due to the plumbing situation. So yeah, the last year, and in particular the last few months, have just been like hit after hit after hit, you know, when life gives you lemons. But I don't know, maybe I should open like a major lemonade manufacturer. Like, I could make a lot of lemonade. Anyway, so I'm looking forward to the new year and to hopefully an easier time of it. I hope that everyone else has had a really nice holiday season and relaxing, and that hopefully you've had some time to get together with family and friends. I was lucky to be able to visit my family earlier on. In December. Before Omicron hit, unfortunately, we did have to cancel a bunch of gatherings later on. So I hope that you're all safe and that you've been able to get together with your loved ones. Yeah, how is everyone watching the stream? How are you feeling? What's new in your lives? Hey, Mom. Mixture says that's pretty and floofy. Thanks, Mish. And Stephen says, hi, Lee, everyone. Happy New Year. Happy New Year. How are you? How's your holiday season been? And how are you enjoying the warmer weather right now? I was half considering doing an outdoor stream and bringing Ember along, but to be honest, although it is warmer, it's also getting darker earlier, and it's been quite overcast. So I was concerned that my lighting might not actually be great if I tried to stream outside right now. Especially seeing as I got started a bit late on this stream. I'm trying to set up to be a little bit more reliable about my streaming times in the new year. Let's actually push this over a little. Hopefully I can get a little bit more of my palette in if I just move this here and move this over there. You're still not going to get the full palette, but hopefully you can get at least some of what I'm doing over here. Try to get as much viewable area as I can. It's always a balance with these streams to try to find a viewing angle that gives people as much context as I can. You know, my palette, my colors, my full paper, my reference if possible, but trying to get all of that and also enough trying to get that, but also enough resolution on what I'm actually working on is always a tough balance to strike. With edited videos, I end up trying to go back and forth between different views, but I haven't felt up to editing in a while, so it's been a while since I put out an actual edited video, although I do have a lot of footage, so hopefully I'll find it in me at some point to turn some of it into videos. Delightful.
Final notice today.
Great. 2 of them, huh?
Yep.
Okay, well, I guess I should get there. Okay, maybe I should call them. So I don't really feel inclined to go there, only to find out they've already disposed of it.
Well, the date on this is actually yesterday.
Yes, I know, that's my issue. So this is Canada Post sending me final notices for undelivered stuff. Now, why they didn't deliver it in the first place is a real great question, because we're never out of the house. There's always been someone in the house during delivery hours. Always. Also, I'm pretty sure that one of these things, they never even gave me the initial notice for, so this is the first that I'm hearing of it. Hi, Val. Hello from Summery, Australia. Daily walks for me now are very early in the morning to catch the cool. I like the idea of that honey cake. That is a lovely calming demo. Thank you. Yes, so I don't know how much of this you caught earlier on, but this painting is actually heading to Australia, to Tasmania. And I did get permission, so this is part of a sketchbook exchange that I'm doing with some friends. And so this is going to friend Bindi in Tasmania, who who did this lovely, lovely initial spread in this book. And then it's going traveling around the world, hitting a whole bunch of different countries and continents. Absolutely gorgeous. And so as a result, I actually specifically wanted to choose something that was seasonal to us here in Canada, and that you wouldn't be likely to see in Australia. So yeah, so this is Canada Goldenrod, but what it looks like in winter. And so I'm trying to do this winter foliage stuff. And yeah, it is this sort of calm, quiet little demo. I have tried to do these weekly. I've really fallen off the wagon with my weekly streams recently, but hopefully I'll get back to it in the new year. Can't wait to see the end of this year. It's been tough. I also keep meaning to go back. I have, so I'm working from my home studio right now, and with COVID, I've been working primarily here, but I do have a co-op studio that I share with a bunch of people, and I had been really excited to head back, but with Omicron and some serious autoimmune. Well, I have an autoimmune condition. My husband is immunocompromised. So we've been pretty much hermiting for a couple of years. And every time I start thinking that I'm gonna, buckle up and go back to the studio, something happens. So this time it's Omicron. And at least until I get my third vaccine, my booster, I'm not heading back. I've been really missing that and the structure that it added to my life. That's my hope for the next year, is that I'll find a way to start getting back in there. I always get sick during the end of year. Right now I have a presumed cold, and last year I had aching chills. Ooh, ouch. I'm so sorry, Val. Fate really doesn't want me to enjoy New Year's. We are ramping up for the traditional New Year freezing rain. Great for driving. Yes, I can handle winter. I can handle summer. I'm really, really not cool with this, like, neither thing where it's like going back and forth between what is like summery weather and wintry weather, and in between we get this freezing rain, and then yep, not fun. Not fun. Definitely not fun. The only thing I don't like about winter is the cold, dry air at night. Yeah, I love to walk in the cold. It feels and feel like it go away after about 20 minutes or so. Gloves and hoodies come off, coats get opened up. Yeah, I've really been enjoying my walks. I have a puppy, and so it's been kind of nice. I tend to put off walking in the cold. Like I don't like getting out there, but I've been enjoying, once I have gotten myself out there, the actual experience, which is of course why I got the dog. Because she wants to go out no matter what. In fact, she's whining about that right now. She would rather not sleep at all, ever. Why would anyone ever need to take naps? So she's locked up in the bedroom, whining about how she'd prefer to be outside. But I'd like to do at least an hour live stream. And then maybe I'll see about whether I can actually fetch that mail that never should have been at the post office to begin with, much less held up forever. And that if they're going to hold things up forever at the post office, they should maybe, actually bother sending me a notification to begin with. Like, I feel like there's just, not been a delivery attempt in some of these cases where somebody got lazy and it never actually made its way to me. Has anyone else in Canada been having some issues with Canada Post? I also am wondering whether a whole bunch of my mail has been going elsewhere, because we keep getting mail for other people. Like, we get mail for our next door neighbors, we get mail for somebody on the street, like a kilometer away that has the same number on their house. So we're on one street, they're about a kilometer away. It's the same address, but the same, like, different street names. And, you know, when I get that, I make an effort to go walk it over to the right place, but I don't understand why these things keep coming to me. Like, I don't live there. Why am I getting other mail delivered to me? And I figure if I'm getting mail delivered to me that doesn't belong to me, then probably other people are getting my mail delivered to them, and whether it ever makes its way to me is entirely in question. So, like, maybe no wonder that I'm getting last attempt delivery notifications on things that there was no delivery ever attempted, because I would know, because we're always home. Got me it as my gift for Christmas. I didn't get one. I'd like to try out digital art. The secret societies are trying to tell you a secret message. I see. That's good. That's it. I'm not good at secret messages. Just tell me straight up. What do I need to know? Honestly, I'm anticipating the new alphabet letters of COVID awaiting us next year. Yes, well, one way or another, like, I think it's fair to assume that this is endemic now. There are just going to be new letters of COVID, and you know, even for those of us with additional immune challenges, or, you know, family members we're concerned about, there comes a point where we do need to figure out what life with endemic COVID looks like, right? So, like, I haven't been using my co-op studio for 2 years now. That's not, like, it's not been good for me physically, mentally. But this was on the assumption that, you know, well, okay, COVID has an end, and, you know, with it being, there's always some new letter coming out. There's always some new variant. At some point, I do have to just figure out, okay, well, you know, what does my life look like? How do I adapt to this long-term situation? I don't have an answer, but something that's been front of mind a lot lately. Because my physical health has definitely suffered from not having an ongoing a rhythm, a structure to what my life looks like. So Dad says it is a sobering thought that there are only so many Greek letters. Yeah, but there are other alphabets, so. And they're skipping a whole bunch of Greek letters because, concerns that there might be some misunderstanding about what the letters are. I forget what it was initially. Jordan thought that alpha and beta referred to something else other than Greek alphabet. So he had some other theory about what the next one was going to be called. I forget what it was. But I think that there's been some letters skipped already. And they're likely to skip others, no pi, because it might refer to something else, or no chai because it could be short for Chinese or whatever. But yes, there are only so many Greek letters, so sooner or later we're going to have to find some new naming convention. It's not going to be not that far away from that point, are we? Yeah, initially I felt like, oh well, I'm kind of an introvert and I don't mind isolating for a bit. And had it been a short while, I would have been relatively fine, but just the loss of any kind of pattern, any kind of rhythm, any kind of accountability to anyone, just in my day-to-day life of like, you have a schedule, you go, you see people, you do things, without any kind of that structure. I've found my ability to motivate myself to keep working on things, keep pushing forward, really, really dropped off. There's a lot of factors there, but Oh, Ember. Oh, so sad. So sad, the little Ember.
I'm gonna put on real pants and real shoes and take your fur off the wall.
Okay, thank you.
In a minute. Amber, I'll get to you in a moment, sweetheart.
It doesn't, like, how much of a walk do you actually want, Jordan? How much of a walk are you wanting? Okay. So if you want to just take her out for like 20 minutes, maybe? Yeah. Like, it doesn't have to be a long walk, and then I'll take her soonish. I do want to just have at least an hour on my live stream. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Omicron is Omega, isn't it? Literally the end? No, Omega and Omicron are two different symbols, I think. But to be honest, like, for all that I had to use a ton of Greek alphabet in school, that was a long time ago, and I don't think I ever actually learned the Greek alphabet, so. But there's still more letters to come. It's just not as many as we might think. And they aren't naming every variant. Like, there's all sorts of variations that happen within the COVID virus that are studied that don't get, alpha, beta, delta, gamma. They're only bothering to number, to letter the variants of concern, where there's something that indicates that this is either more transmissible or causes more severe infection, or in the case of Omicron, it has a number of changes to the spike protein that most of the vaccines are based on. So it makes the vaccines less effective at stopping it. Because basically then when you catch Omicron, you're catching, your body doesn't know it. Your body has learned to react to a certain spike protein, but it's a very different spike protein that shows up. So it still has some effectiveness, but much less. Which begs the question of why we're very focused on, okay, well, we're going to get boosters for this, but even with the boosters, the boosters are still the same stuff that doesn't really work so great. It's also, like, it dawned on me recently that a lot of these epidemiology studies, like, there's no way that the World Health Organization did not model this coming. There is no way that there weren't already. Like they have, they would model spread, and they did model spread. We heard about them modeling spread, but they modeled spread also based on rates of mutation within a virus. Like COVID is not the only virus that mutates. The flu also mutates. Every virus mutates. And there's no way that they didn't predict this coming, because it was in the news. Like it was talked about that there are these mutations that we're watching for, and that, you know, we chose this specific method of creating an RNA vaccine based on the specific spike protein, because the likelihood of it mutating quickly in this specific, you know, unique protein versus the whole molecule is lower. All of this was, I'm sure all of this was modeled. I'm sure that there were a ton of models that the World Health Organization and other health organizations did to model this spread. And yet all of our governments, the way we were presented this, you know, 2 years ago, was all about not containment, but, or not, sorry, not eradication, but containment, on this notion that if we contain it, then we can get a vaccine. Like, for sure, all of this, for sure, the position we're in now wasn't the worst case scenario, because there's a number of things that have come up that they've discussed, that like there was concerns that Delta would be much more transmissible than it is. I'm sure that the worst case scenario models were a lot worse than what we saw, and yet what we were presented from nearly every government around the world was this containment strategy. And it was always presented as a like, okay, well, we need to do this for this many weeks or this many months. Never, you know, we need to figure out what we're going to be doing for the forever. And now it's becoming clear, I think, to everyone in the public that, no, this is a forever thing. But there's no way that the leaders of major governments, like the Canadian government, you're telling me that the leaders of the parties were not presented with modeling from the World Health Organization that 2 years ago said there's a real possibility that this is going to become endemic. And yet, if you think of what the policies were that were put in place, it really didn't do much for protecting us against endemic COVID or adapting or anything. So it's, yeah. I'm not really sure what to make of that, but that's also sobering. As long as there's people who don't vaccinate, we aren't going anywhere. Well, yeah, but I mean, beyond people who don't vaccinate, like people who don't vaccinate in developed countries where there's enough vaccine available is one problem that we're definitely running into. But like there's other issues, right? Like there's people who don't vaccinate because they don't believe in vaccines in Canada and the US. That's a problem. But there's also other problems. There's problems like, I mean, I've gotten both of my vaccines, and I'm scheduled to have my third one, but they knock me flat, and every subsequent one knocks me flatter because my immune system attacks me. The only thing that can get me down is myself. And, you know, that's a documented issue. People with autoimmune diseases are more affected, and I certainly don't have the worst autoimmune condition out there. So there's people who, you know, it's not really reasonable to expect them to get a vaccine that'll knock them down for a month, every month, right? Or every 3 months. Like I'll be headed to my third vaccine in a year. So that's an issue. There's an issue of like there's the developed world, but then there's all the rest of the world where, you know, people would like to get vaccines but don't have access to vaccines, or don't have access to good vaccines, or don't have access to, you know, like there's just, yeah. It's hard to see like what, you know, what is this resolution? What happens? Yeah, I've not been a real ray of sunshine recently. Sorry. Do we want to talk about something a little bit more positive? Anyone have some good news? Something more fun to discuss? Stephen, I am getting mine at Apothecare on Park Street, which is near you. Like 400 Park Street. It's like right across from the hospital. And I booked yesterday for an appointment on January 12th. Another option, my sister-in-law just pointed out that Bingaman's has a number of openings this week. What was your first watercolor set? I can go fetch it. I'll go fetch my first watercolor set. It's actually not, it's the same as my first watercolor set. It's not actually my first watercolor set. Sorry. My very first watercolor set as a child, I don't have a version of here. It was the Pastel, you know, the tubes. There's a little set of tubes. It's still on sale somewhere. That's the first watercolor set I ever used or ever remember using as a little kid. In my teens, I got something very much like this Winsor Newton Cotman set. I feel like Cotman was a little less yucky than it is now back in the day, but it was still pretty yucky. And that's gone to the ages, long time ago, but I have gotten this replacement somewhat more recently, just because it is still such a common set. So when I'm teaching classes or for some other purposes, it is nice to have this. Help refer back to. Yeah. And it's a neat little, it's a neat compact little set. This case is pretty much unbreakable. So it's not a bad start. The paints aren't really great. And especially if you live somewhere where you have dry seasons or really cold winter where your indoor air will get really dry, it can dry hard like rocks and be really difficult to re-wet. Over time, like when you first open it, if you get a new set, it's sometimes all right, but over time it kind of goes downhill. It's also, not the selection of colors that I would necessarily choose. But again, it's a very, very common little set, nice and portable. I accidentally ordered 2 of those one time, but at least I was able to give the other to a friend. Yeah, they're super common. They're probably the most common watercolor set out there, certainly around here. So, often they show up overpriced, depending on where you're shopping. But you know, at the same time, like, that's a portable little thing. So if you can get it at a reasonable price, and you're not sure if watercolor is your thing, or you're just going to be doing like sort of more of a coloring style of watercolor where you have line work and you're not doing a whole lot of mixing, and you just want to add, you know, the idea of color rather than trying to create shadows and layer and do a lot of mixing, then this is fine if you're just doing like an urban sketching sort of set, and then as you go on, it's a nice little base if you don't like some of the colors, like if you find you just don't really use white, for example. You can just replace it with something that you would use more as you use some of the colors up, and you either reach the bottom or find that, you know, you would like a color similar to that but a more professional range. You can replace them, and you still have that little box. So like, you know, a lot of people just go on with a nice little box like this and just replace them, and gradually it ends up just being filled with all professional colors, or other ranges, and that's also totally fine. Like, it's not, these are not paints that I would strongly recommend to anyone, but sometimes it's just what's available, and I have, you know, even recommended that set when people want to start working in color, and they, you know, it's what's accessible, rather than trying to buy a whole bunch of paints and make a set and have you. Yeah, I have complicated feelings on it. Oh yeah, I remember some being sold for $30 US. Yeah, that's crazy. And I have seen that sort of pricing here, and like, it is not worth that. If you are going to spend $30 US, what you do is you go find either a professional range or something like Van Gogh, and you go and you buy 6 professional watercolor paints and you put them in a Altoids tin, if that's your kind of budget. But if you can get it for like half that, and these do often go for half that or less, you just sometimes have to look around a little bit more and find them on sale, or often if you get them in the UK, they're cheaper, or sometimes like on sale, or some of the budget US suppliers. If you're getting them at a local art store in Canada, you do have to be really careful and try to get it on sale. But at that point, then, you know, you would be hard pressed to get a usable set of professional colors for that price. And there is an advantage to having something like 12 colors versus just having 3 and having to mix all of your colors. Like, I'm all in favor of learning to mix things, but, you know, it's not it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. You know, for some people and sometimes some types of painting, you're much better off with having a few more colors. Like, I don't feel like anyone really needs to have a watercolor set with, you know, 100 ready to go colors. And, you know, that is something that I definitely recommend against, is like going for the full set of anything, whether it's a professional range or like a really cheap student or craft grade range. Like, I know that the other thing that people do is Michaels has I think it's called Artist Loft line of watercolors, that they sell, you know, 50 or 100 tubes for it's $50 in Canada usually, which is about 30 to 35 US dollars. And that is definitely, like, there's no reason why you need that many paints. There's no reason why anybody needs that many paints. And if you're getting that many paints for that cheap, you know, what you're going to pay for is quality. And it becomes really difficult to paint anything that's not chalky at that point. So it's just going to frustrate you. Like, you're better off, if you have that kind of budget, to buy just a few really good quality paints. Or if you want something more like 12, you can get something like Van Gogh or even the Cotman in tubes and get 12 colors for the same price. And you'll get much better paint than you would getting 50 or 100 paints for that really low price. And then if you do have a lot more money, well, then just save it. Buy paper, buy yourself a house, like, buy yourself a car. You know, if you're gonna buy like, don't buy all 300 and whatever Daniel Smith paints. Like, nobody needs that. And I say this as somebody who has like an absurd collection of watercolors. I've collected them over time, and a lot of it was just, you know, because I'm curious for comparison's sake. They're from a bunch of different brands. I didn't end up focusing on different pigments that I use. But like, if I had that many paints in a palette, you know, I wouldn't know what to do with it. And I don't think anyone would either. And it doesn't help your work to have like a bunch of very similar paints all side by side. Yeah. Right. So having some, like, being forced to mix some of the time is a good thing, in my opinion. I do know that some people who do more of a comic style do like having a larger selection than I do. So I have, this is one of my main palettes, and I have, here, let me push this over. So this is one of my main palettes, and I have about 17 paints in here, I believe. Yeah, sorry, it is 17. And that's a little bit more than I really need in one palette. But that's about where I end up landing, is I end up having like 16 to 18 paints in most of the palettes that I have on the go now. They might vary a little bit from palette to palette. I like experimenting, but I never need more than that in one piece. Usually in one piece, I'm using more like 6. So I could, or less, like sometimes 2 or 3. So if if I was just starting out, I feel like starting out with a smaller selection is great. Maybe not starting out with 3 or 4 paints. I know that some artists do recommend that, but I do think that can lead to some frustration if you're not very, very confident with color mixing from the start. Trying to figure it out with only a few paints means that you have this huge learning curve before you can really get anything that you're remotely happy with. So I think, a little bit more of a coloring in approach, something if you have your 12 paints or whatever, that's great. But I would recommend, like, whatever your budget is, spend it on 12 or fewer paints of the best quality that you can afford with that budget. Cotman, Winsor Newton Cotman is often not the cheapest option in any market for the quality that they provide. There are student grade paint. There are other student grade paints like Van Gogh and like Daler Rowney Aquafine you can sometimes find that are a similar price point or even a little bit cheaper, but are a bit better quality. They're just, Cotman is something that you're likely to find in almost any store around the world. So a lot of people will end up with this. I ended up with this. If I'm teaching a nature journaling class and somebody's like, I really want to try watercolor, I want to run out to a store right now today, and this store has Cotman on at a reasonable price, like, okay, well then get the Cotman, that's fine. The box is nice. So that's what I started with. I like the koi fresh out of the tube. The next day they get a bit crusty, says Stephen. Yeah, I've never really enjoyed the koi, but again, a lot of this comes down to how you paint. Like, I've seen your work, Stephen, and you tend to use watercolor in a much more like saturated, single pass, bright colors way. And in that case, tube paints are probably, especially budget tube paints, are probably a lot easier to work with than budget pan paints. Now, I haven't really tried the koi tubes. I have tried the koi pans and I hate them. But I haven't tried the tube ones, but I can totally see if you are going to use it in like more of a, I guess, gouache sort of sense with less layering and less building up of mixes and more like a thicker application all at once, then I can totally see how a budget paint that does have a little bit more filler, but applied straight out of the tube could really work for that. It's not really how I work, so that's unlikely to work as well for me. But again, yeah, there's professional artists who work with all sorts of things. With Cotman, because it's an all vegan range. And do some really wonderful illustrations, so it's not, there's a value to getting professional paints, and I definitely do recommend it if you are going to be doing, if your goal is to be doing something with more layering, with more color mixing, I would say try to, rather than getting a lot of cheaper paints, try to get very few professional paints, and then learn to mix them and layer them. Because it's a whole different skill set that's really difficult to learn if your paints just don't want to do that. So I don't know how much progress is really visible in this painting since I've started. My husband has gone out with the dog, but he'll probably be back fairly soon. And then I'll just have to take her. And I do have to figure out this Canada Post issue. So I'm just going to keep on working, I guess, until they get back. But now would be a good time if anybody has any questions regarding my painting, my work, my schedule, my anything, or comments, or if I have a mod in here who can throw in some Discord links. I have a Discord. I also have a Patreon. I will be canceling Patreon payments for this month because I've been really not present the past couple of months. And it's not fair to be charging people Patreon fees when I'm not keeping up with the promises I make in exchange for those payments. But I do have a Patreon, and maybe someone will throw a link to that in here as well. Probably wouldn't get the pans. Koi pans tend to crack for some reason as you use them. Yeah, they've got a lot of filler in them, like a lot of it's probably chalk or some other kind of cheap white, like talc or something. So they're more opaque. They look bright in the pan, but then as you use them, that stuff soaks up. Like it doesn't. It means it's not very rewettable, and so it tends to crack up in the pan. Prima, I heard, is very vibrant and bleed into each other wonderfully, but the light fastness isn't the best. Yeah, so they do have some it's hard to find full pigment information for them. It is available in some places, but it's not on the packages, I believe. But they do use some non-light fast pigments. Now, I mean, my caveat with that is that even professional brands, like it's more about the pigments used than the anything with how bright they are. So it depends on your use. If you are concerned about light fastness, like you don't want something to fade, then you want to be able to see the pigments. You want to be able to learn about pigments and figure out which pigments are light fast enough for your uses, and then you'll want to be careful of that regardless of which brand you're using. So no matter which brand you're getting, you can be getting Schminke or Winsor Newton Professional or Daniel Smith or any professional brand, and most of them will still have paints like Opera Rose, which is made with a fugitive dye to get that bright pink color. That's the only way to get it. So it'll fade. Most paint brands will also have something like Alizarin Crimson, like the real Alizarin Crimson, not just the permanent hue version. And again, that will fade no matter who made it. So if you are concerned about light fastness, unfortunately, you probably have to do a little bit more research than just getting a specific brand. Prima, I believe in terms of behavior, now I haven't used Prima myself, but I have seen lots of reviews of it and comparisons with other paints. It's, in terms of behavior, it's going to behave similar to many of the student grade brands. Depending on how you use it, you might find that it's nicer in some aspects where it might mix better than something like a Winsor Newton Cottonman doesn't flow a huge amount. It might be a little less good in some other respects in terms of rewettability. Something like Van Gogh might re-wet a little bit easier. Different people have different wants. But I don't think that there's anything to be ashamed of if you have a Prima set any more than, you know, a Cotman set or a Van Gogh set or a Schminke set or you know, a professional grade set. Like you find what's useful for you at the time with your knowledge, and then the best thing that you can do is use it, right? And as you use the paints you have, you learn what you want next. So, you know, for all that I might not recommend a lot of student grade paints to a lot of people, if that's what you have, then like that's what you should use, unless you're... What are your plans for the coming year? I am planning on applying to a concept to realization grant from the Canada Council for the Arts, and setting up an exhibition for probably 2 years from now. I've had an idea that I've been trying to get off the ground for an exhibition for a while, and by trying to get off the ground, I mean not really actively, like I've just, you know, idling. And so I was just talking to a studio mate earlier today who's had some great success with grant applications, and talking about strategies for getting grants, and hopefully that'll help me be able to get a nice exhibition together for the next couple of years and work on that. I want to get back to posting on YouTube and my blog. Yeah. I don't know if that sounds like I'm aiming really really high or really low. Yeah. I do like the ultramarine from Koi. Is it, like, does it re-wet easily, or what's special about the ultramarine from Koi? Do you ever use oil pastel? As a little child, I really enjoyed oil pastel. I had a set when I was young, again, like a Pentel set, I think. And I have at various points sort of toyed with the idea of getting back into oil pastel. The truth is, it scares me a little bit. It's very, very messy, and I'm a very, very messy person who likes to do very, very neat artwork. So oil pastel and I are likely to challenge each other. So I think I even got a set at one point and ended up giving it away before really experimenting with it. Just because the idea of getting my hands all oily and then rubbing them all over a paper, I think that oil pastel can do some really beautiful work, and I do have some fond memories of just doing like abstract stuff with oil pastel when I was a kid. So that's something that I will probably want to try at some point, but I haven't really played with it much recently, and it scares me. Hi, Lindsay. If you just photograph your art and don't keep it, use Opera or whatever, or Artist Gouache or whatever. Hi. Well, I mean, gouache, likewise, there's a lot of talk about how it's not so light fast, but really it's up to pigments. You can get light fast gouache. You just have to read the pigment information, and most gouache lines contain more non-Lightfast options than their watercolor counterparts. Like, they tend to be more limited lines that contain several non-Lightfast options because people like to have things like Opera Rose in their gouache. And because gouache has historically been an illustration medium, and yeah, if you're going to be just photographing your work, or you're going to be keeping it in sketchbooks, or you're going to be selling it, but you just, you don't care what it's going to look like in 20 years because you're selling it cheap, or you're selling it expensive and you think that, it's ephemeral and that's part of the charm, or whatever, like, then do what you want. Like, there's no rule that says that your art has to be Lightfast. I can talk about why I prefer to use Lightfast paints across pretty much like the majority of my work, I would say. Most of my palettes have all Lightfast pigments, and my reasoning is just some of my work I do sell, and I will sell original paintings in the hundreds or thousands of dollars. And being a watercolor artist, there's a stigma around watercolor that watercolor is ephemeral and fades. That's not true. It's up to the pigments. But I have regularly run into potential clients who have asked me, I would like a painting, but I'm concerned because watercolor fades. And I like being able to reassure whoever asks that, no, I make sure that my paintings, if I sell them to you, that I'm using only watercolors that will outlive you. I'm only using pigments that will stand the test of time. I'm only using paper that won't yellow or fade. I'm doing everything right. You hang this on your wall anywhere in your house, and 20, 50, 100 years from now, it's still going to look like the day that it was sold. I don't think that it's necessary for everyone to do that. I know a lot of artists who I admire who do beautiful work in other media, or even in watercolor, but who do colored pencil work, and a lot of colored pencils have fugitive pigments as well. Or they work in oils, but they use like Opera Rose in oils. Well, it doesn't matter what medium it is, whether it's acrylic or oil or watercolor. If you've got that hot pink isn't going to last. It's not going to be that hot pink in 10 years. If you put it up against a window, it's not going to be. And that's fine. I mean, I also know people who do collage artwork where they cut out pages from magazines and posters and print and paste them up on canvases. All of these are valid art mediums. Some of them won't outlive you, and that's okay. My personal choice is to just across the board be able to say, yeah, choose any of these pieces and any of them will stand the test of time. As a result, even though I do a lot of work, like in this sketchbook, I could use fugitive paints if I wanted to, because it's going to be in a sketchbook. It's not, this is cellulose paper in a sketchbook, so it's likely to break down before the pigments do. But I'm not going to, because then I would have something in my palette that then I need to remember, oh no, this is on regular paper, so I can't use this paint on this palette. So the only fugitive paints I have are in my regular palettes, and then I would only use them if I know this is a project where I can use them. So that's my choice. It's the first time I heard that watercolor. I always had the opposite assumption that watercolor is the paint that lasts the longest. Do they mean it is more prone to damage, just not saying it right? I think they actually mean it's gonna fade. I mean, I do specify, like, it's on paper, so it needs to be in a frame. But no, I mean, I think a lot of people have an assumption that watercolor is like a student or like a ladies medium, you know, like in Victorian times where you would have real artists who work in oil, and then you have ladies who doodle little things in watercolor, and then the watercolor fades away, which is true only because many of the pigments in the day were very fugitive. But so were the oils. It's just the oils last a tiny bit longer. Yeah, there's a lot of weird assumptions about watercolor out in the world. They're not universal for sure. Like, you know, there's plenty of people who don't have those assumptions, but I just find it easier to not deal with it. I find it easier to just be able to say, like, nope, you know, this is gonna outlive anything else in your house. And you don't need any special glass for it. You don't, like, it needs to be behind glass. And I've used an archival mat, and if you replace the mat, like, try to replace it with an archival mat. But I wonder why certain pigments are called fugitive and not just poor quality. I will demonstrate that to you right now. Here I have a set that was mailed to me, just a selection of paints. This is the Billy Shoal collection from Sennelier. And this was mailed to me by Ev Bolt, who's another artist here on YouTube. She's really neat. She paints cats. And this is Alizarin Crimson. Hey. And I can tell you that Sennelier's version of Alizarin Crimson is really lovely, but Alizarin Crimson as a general rule is just a really lovely pigment. It is not poor quality. It has some unique properties. Right, okay, so I'm just gonna, actually I have two demonstrations in this. So the first one is this Alizarin Crimson, which is one of the most fugitive pigments that's available in modern watercolor lines. Does anyone remember what the pigment code for Alizarin Crimson is? It's escaped me just now. Just realized. But it is beautiful. Like there's a transparency to it that you don't really find, a transparency and a flow to it that you just don't find in any other reds really at all. It's just like, if I go and I'm just gonna put some water here, like the way this flows, the evenness with which it applies, the transparency, like you don't get that in other red pigments. That, like, you know, you can get permanent alizarin crimson, which is a mix of other pigments that are approximately the same color. They are not the same joy to use. So some artists, like Billy Scholl, will decide that even though this pigment doesn't last as long as other pigments do, that this is the best pigment for, you know, they paint beautiful red roses, and their beautiful red roses are just not as beautiful if they use other pigments, and therefore they will continue to use permanent alizarin, or they will continue to use original alizarin crimson. They won't replace it with like a hue. And that's their choice. I choose not to put alizarin crimson in my palettes, even though I really like how it looks, because it does fade. Likewise, this here is Sennelier's Opera Rose. Again, it is, or sorry, that's not Opera Rose, that is, okay, this here is Sennelier's, I'm not sure what they call it, it's PR122, Purple Lake, maybe? I don't know. It's PR122, it's quinacridone magenta. This is the closest thing to a bright pink, to a bright magenta color that you're likely to find in any watercolor line that is Lightfast. There are other alternatives, but they're not as Lightfast. As you can see, this is fairly dark. Beside it is Opera Rose. So Opera Rose is usually, and in this line too, it is made with a mix of this quinacridone magenta and a fluorescent dye. So this is what Opera Rose looks like. And as you can see, it is brighter. Now, it'll fade over time. The fluorescent will come out of it, and it'll settle out to be the same color once it's fully faded. It'll become the same color as this one, or like a little washed out because you'll lose the fluorescent. But again, many artists choose to use this because they want that bright pink. You can't get that bright pink in Lightfast colors, so that's the choice they make. Do I have a third option? A third example. Here's my third example. Prussian Blue. Prussian Blue is listed as Lightfast by most manufacturers. And it is, in fact, Lightfast. It doesn't react to light alone. If you just take the paint and you apply it straight out of the tube and you apply it on glass and you put it on the glass, it's not going to fade. But due to manufacturing processes, as well as just the nature of the pigment, if there's any kind of contamination from other minerals in your paper or in your water, like if you live in Kitchener-Waterloo like I do, and you're on groundwater and it's full of magnesium and calcium, and you take this beautiful blue that's very pretty and very saturated and very moody and has this great flow, and you take this beautiful blue and you expose it to air, then the iron in this paint will oxidize in the presence of light, and it will fade. It will lose vibrancy over time. And apparently if you put it back in a closet, it'll return to its dark state, although that seems like a lot to ask of your buyers. Like, okay, well, if your greens start looking a little dull, just put this painting in a closet for a few years and come out, it'll be like new. But this will react with any kind of contaminants. So there's a lot of reasons why artists might choose to use these paints. All of these paints and others, even though they're not Lightfast, even though they won't stand the test of being on your wall in front of a window for 100 years. That doesn't mean that they're less good quality. It just means they won't be around. Even water? Yeah. So water, I mean, if I use distilled water only, if I only use distilled water, and I made sure that my brushes were completely clean and washed in distilled water, and then I used Prussian blue, and I was quite certain that my paper wasn't buffered with calcium carbonate, then I could theoretically use Prussian blue, and some brands of Prussian blue would be Lightfast. But the reality is I use tap water. My tap water is full of calcium carbonate and magnesium, or worse. Some of our taps, we have a water softener that runs to remove some of that lime scale and iron, and it replaces it with salt, like table salt, calcium chloride, or sorry, potassium chloride. And yeah. So my water is either salted or full of calcium and magnesium and iron ions, or both, usually somewhere in the middle. So usually both. But yeah. PR83. Yes, that is correct. That is Alizarin Crimson. Anyway, there are lots of situations where these paints might be worth using for some people. There are lots of situations where I would like to use these paints. I just tend to avoid them in my main palettes, but I wouldn't say that they are less good quality. I would just say they are not Lightfast. Now, there are cases where it is a quality thing, like sometimes student brands will use a less Lightfast pigment, not because it has some qualities that the Lightfast pigments don't, but just because it's cheaper. And in those cases, it is a quality issue, right? Like sometimes they'll have a red and it's not a very Lightfast red, and it's not because that red has some property like Alizarin Crimson where it's really unique. The only reason they've chosen that is because it's the cheapest red pigment they can find. And it might, there might be other pigments that behave the same or better in any measurable way. So basically, when handling fugitive pigments, you need to treat them like actual criminal fugitives. There's another artist here on YouTube. Does anyone know what Alex's YouTube handle is? Is it Ginger Snaps as well? I'll try to find it and throw it in the description. She does a bunch of paint comparisons. And she's put together a palette that she calls her Outlaw palette that's all just fugitives. It's a neat idea, and it's something that I toyed with doing something similar at one point right before the pandemic. So there was a point right before the pandemic where I was in talks to do a nature guide to Yosemite National Park, and that's fallen through, so we'll talk about it. But it had occurred to me like I was going to do a whole series of different little paintings for it, but they were just going to be like little images in this nature guide. And so it was all for reproduction, and I figured, well, if I'm going to do 1,000 paintings, and they're all just going to be these little paintings that are just for reproduction, I'm not selling them, then I can have a palette that's just for that project. I might be exaggerating with 1,000. Might have been only 200. I can have a palette that's just for that project, and I can have fun with it, and I can say, I'm going to use real indigo. Indigo is another one of these. So this is indigo. It's like that blue jean color. You can get similar things that are just a mix of different pigments that have a similar color. But like natural indigo, ooh, okay, well, and I've, that's cool. I sprinkled a whole bunch of indigo sprinkles on this. I'm gonna mix this up here. But again, you know, a lot of them are mixed, like if they're blue mixed with a black, they sometimes separate a little bit. There's something to be said for sometimes you want the actual pigment. It behaves a little bit differently than the things that are meant to imitate it. Lots of people like natural indigo. It's not actually widely available. Most brands make a hue rather than using the real pigment. You can get it from Schminke, although they also mix it with other stuff. And you can get it from, what brand do I have? I have Shinhan PWC. And you can also get it from, I believe My Merry Blue makes it. As well as, like, I would say the majority of handmade watercolor companies, like individual watercolor makers, offer real indigo. It's like, it's a widely available pigment. It's just not as commonly used in watercolor. It's kind of a niche thing because it's, you know, not the most permanent, and you can make things that look very similar. But it's pretty. It has a certain texture to it that the hues don't quite replicate. I heard of her. Don't know. I pulled the 3, 4, and 5 out of my Prisma collections. That was a lot of fugitive pencils. Yeah, so that's kind of the interesting thing working in botanical art is you get a lot of people willing to pay a lot of money for paintings, and some of them have some real questions about is watercolor permanent, but you'll see the same people buy colored pencil work. And it is possible to make Lightfast colored pencils, but the truth is the majority of artists use the common lines of pencils, whether it's Faber-Castell Polychromos or Prismacolor, Premiere, or any of the professional colored pencil ranges contain a huge number of fugitive colored pencils. Their ultramarine was not Lightfast. Wow, that's impressive. Like, what did they make that with if not ultramarine? I found looking at even the Lightfast, like Derwent Lightfast colored pencils, they may have published their pigment information now, but initially they hadn't. The majority of colored pencil lines don't have any pigment information available. What is it? What's the super expensive one? Caran d'Ache. Their Lightfast line. Name of which escapes me. Has a full listing of all of the pigments that they put in all of their colored pencils, and it is a strange thing to read through because it's, I don't know, I would have expected to see a similar range as watercolors, but it's not really. Like, it's not. I am baffled by that statement. Sorry, which statement? One of my statements or what Stephen just said? Indigo gives chroma at dark value like Indian Throne? Yes, Indigo. And so a lot of Indigo is similar to Indian Throne except a much greener hue. So a lot of the hues will be made with Indian Throne and then some kind of yellow or green pigment and a blue and a black, sorry. Where like the indigo is even a little bit more muted than Indian Throne often is. So it's like it's not difficult to replicate that hue with Lightfast pigments. It's, it's just a fun paint. It's a unique behavior, and if it's something that you use a lot of and you're going to be working in sketchbooks, for some people, having that as one standalone pigment is worth it. Oh my goodness, I'm getting smudgy marks everywhere because I'm so messy. Most of the Prisma blues missed the cut. Most were not good. That is so strange. Because if you look at watercolor lines, like reds often are there's just this long history of reds and pinks that are not Lightfast. And at this point, there's like quinacridones that have filled that niche, so now you can get reds that are much more Lightfast, but there's a long history of reds that are not Lightfast. There's a long history of greens that are not Lightfast, but blues? I mean, ultramarine has been around forever, and it's cheap. Sorry, forever, but not actually. Like, but it's it's been around for a really long time. You do have things like Indian Throne, which are quite Lightfast. All of the phthalos have been, there's some of the earliest modern synthetics, and they're very inexpensive. So there's, like, even without getting into cobalts and other manganese and other blues, there's a lot of like really affordable, widely available, bright, saturated blues to work from that are quite Lightfast. It seems odd that you would choose to use non-Lightfast options. Like, I know that they exist. You can get PB1 and stuff, but an NB1, which is the, sorry, so I mentioned Indigo. This is the synthetic single pigment Indigo. PB66 is what I trialed. You can also get PB1, which is like indigo from the indigo plant, which is, I believe, slightly less Lightfast still. That's interesting. I've been on for an hour and 52 minutes. I thought that my husband was going to be back quite a while ago with the dog. That's neat. Where all did they go? Sunset is now 10 minutes later in Waterloo. Sorry? 10 minutes later than... I do wonder if Prima's lack of lightfastness stems from their manufacturing process, since they seem to be unique. I don't... Sorry. Prima's lack of lightfastness. No, it stems from their use of non-lightfast pigments. They don't tend to publish lightfastness information or pigment information directly on their packaging, but it is available from the manufacturer. The reason their paints are not particularly lightfast is because they use a number of non-lightfast pigments for budget reasons. Right, so I'm not sure what that rough texture is caused by. That is weird. It might just be like a certain kind of low pressure extrusion. I think they have extruded pans, so if you look at, for example, Cotman is another example of an extruded pan. You'll see that it comes in this little, this one's not wanting to pull it. Sometimes you can pull them right out. I think I put some water in them to make them sit down. But you'll see from the side here that it's cut along the edge. It's not poured into the pan. It's not a liquid that they poured. So there's two ways of making pans. One of them is you take a liquid paint and you pour it into a pan and you let it dry. And the other one is you make a much harder consistency paint and you extrude it through a high pressure nozzle and you cut it. And that's what I believe Prima does, along with things like Cotman. But it's possible that their mix is a little bit different, and so as a result they get more air caught into the paints as they're extruding them through whatever their system is, would be my guess. As to what causes that rough texture. But I think the easiest explanation for why Prima's paints are less Lightfast than you might find in professional paints or even most student grade paints is just they have a number, they use a number of dyes, non-Lightfast dyes. I heard that it's caused by air bubbles that rise when the Prima pans dry. Right, so I think that they use an extrusion nozzle, but that they have like a lower pressure and a higher humidity level. So like they're extruded like the Cotmans, but they're moister when they go in. So whereas the Cotmans won't get as much air caught in them, the Primas do. That's my guess as to what that texture is about. I've seen it. I really haven't worked with Prima myself enough to really be able to comment on it terribly much. But you can get, they do share their pigment information. They just don't make it super easy. Like it's not published on the pans themselves. I guess they're not marketing to the sort of people who care. I had a couple of Prisma Seashell Pink that were wildly different colors from each other. Yes, yes. So this is part of. I've had a few experiences with Prisma colors like that. At this point I haven't had Prisma colors in quite a while, or used really used colored pencils much in general. How closely are you following the shapes of your actual model there, and how much are you just adding leaves in the approximately right shape? This one's actually fairly close. But it's hard to get. I'm trying to figure out. It's hard to get this camera on an angle where you'd be able to see what I see, but it is actually fairly close. Because I'm trying to figure out like the shape of these leaves, and it's the shadows and stuff on them. It's a little difficult to do if I'm getting too far from my reference, but it's not perfect. In some cases, I'm being guided more by like how the granulation happened, like when I put colors down on here, how they spread. So if I have an area that's already got like more of a blue tone or is a little bit deeper, then I'm going to put the shadow there, even if the actual shadow on my reference is a little bit off from that. But in general, I'm trying to keep my general shape pretty close in this case, due to just because like the shadows on this and the different shapes of these little leaves are so complicated that I think I would have a lot of trouble if I wasn't able to look at my reference and see roughly where I'm supposed to be on this and what the shadows in that area look like. So closer than it really looks, then it's, a lot of this is kind of random mess, but I am basing the random mess fairly closely on the random mess that I see in front of me. In this case, I very often do change things from my model to my painting deliberately. I feel like that's a lot of my purpose in creating paintings, is to represent something that isn't necessarily visible in one piece. So I might take the seed head from, like if I was making this into a larger painting, I might take the seed head from this goldenrod and then add a stem gall from a different one, put it in front of a third one that I picked from a completely different field, change the exact section of stem that I'm painting so that I get some of the more interesting leaves. If I'm painting a whole bunch of these, a lot of the time, in this case, the leaves are all curled up around, but often they'll be blown out to one side because that's the way the wind was heading. And it would look really wrong if I was drawing 3 of them and 2 of them have all their leaves pointing one direction and the third one has all their leaves pointing the opposite direction. So, I would change something like that. I do a lot of changing of my references. I feel like if there's a purpose at all to me painting versus just going outside and taking a picture, it's that I can create something in a painting that you don't necessarily see in real life, or communicate it in a way that you don't necessarily see in real life. So change color saturations to focus on specific areas, or combine different elements from different plants to create one plant that shows all the things that I want it to show, the stem that I want, the leaves that I want, the flowers that I want, the shape that I want. So I do a lot of changing from my references all the time. Kind of see that as that's the point of making art. Like if I was just gonna take a picture and then trace it and then color in exactly the colors that show up in the picture, that might be an interesting exercise to practice painting, to learn how to mix those colors, but I don't think that that's, personally, I don't find that the most interesting exercise from an artistic perspective. Seems a little bit pointless. Like the original, like the original work of finding the reference of taking the photo was the artistic thing, and now you're just doing unnecessary work. I don't really get the point of doing that, so I do tend to specifically look for subjects where, you know, there's something that I've noticed about it that isn't obvious from a single view of a single plant. But in this specific case, this being a sketch, not a finished piece, and this being about practicing creating these patterns, even though a lot of this is quite messy, you know, that this little bit of bare what are they? They're like the pods without the little fluff on them, is in fact in that location on my reference. These little branches off of the stem, they are spaced in that way on the real stem. I did in fact put these bundles, these fluffy general shapes, they're all more or less where I found them on my original reference. This is fairly close. I heard that watercolor paper quality tends to be more important than paint quality. Yes, so a lot of artists do feel that way. I think to an extent, yes, but it really depends what you're comparing with what. You can get some really cheap watercolor paper, and it won't take layers at all. And it won't take wet washes at all. It'll just curl up. And so if that is your baseline, then yeah, you're better off using good paper, or even like decent paper, and the cheapest watercolors. Good paper and cheap watercolors will produce better results than like paper that rolls up and bobbles up and any watercolors. No question about that. I've struggled with this a bit because on the other extreme, if you hang out in botanical art circles, there are a lot of people who are very, 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 very extremely fussy about their paper, and they will only use a certain brand of paper, and only if it was manufactured between this year and that year, because then the presses changed. I have not found myself to be that fussy about paper. I'm willing to work with most paper, provided it has a relatively smooth finish and is usually I work with hot press. I can use cold press if it's one of the smoother kinds of cold press, or certainly if it doesn't have any kind of linear texture to it. And I tend to prefer 100% cotton, although in this case, for example, this is not cotton paper. And I wouldn't choose it for a finished piece, but it is fine for me right now. It's certainly not bobbling up or anything. It's also cold press, which is, so it's bumpier than my usual. Again, because this is a sketchbook exchange, so it's not my sketchbook. This is just me practicing on what's in front of me. I feel like if you have moderately good paper, then the difference between like a student grade and a professional grade watercolor then becomes fairly important if you are going to be doing a lot of mixing and layering. If you're not going to be doing mixing and layering, then yeah. I do paint a lot on cheap fat pad paper. It is rugged but very visible herringbone thing. Regular patterns in paper drive me nuts. I just use cheap bee paper, but bee paper is 100% cotton though, isn't it? I think this is the thing, like, I have seen some bad paper. Bad paper does exist. And if you're comparing bad paper to good paper, and then you're comparing student watercolor to good watercolor, then yes, take the student watercolor and get your good paper or even your okay paper and use that, because the bad paper is bad. Like, really bad paper is really bad. It's like napkins. Like, you can't paint watercolor on napkins. So if you have a paper that's absorbing too much water, that's rolling up, that's really bad, it is really, really bad. But I feel like some people apply that to all paper selections, and they'll say, well, I only want to use Arches and not Fabriano. If they're both 100% cotton, the same weight, the same finish, the same, because they like the finish better, or vice versa. And I think if you're making that distinction between paper, then then it's personal preference, not. And likewise with paint, I feel like you can get some bigger differences in paint. I think if the Canson, like the Canson student, the value packs, whatever they're called, everyday something, Canson XL, maybe. Or some of the home brands from some of the art supply stores, where it's a cellulose, like a beta cellulose, and it is like some of those papers, you put watercolor on them and you try to put any kind of substantial amount of water and they start like bobbling up. Artistico always seem to make a fish scales dry brush effect. Not if you use hot press. If you use hot press, then it's very smooth. Except not as smooth as it used to be, and if you're a botanical artist, that's a big deal. I'm listening in as I prepare Vietnamese spring rolls, cold rolls. Oh, those are delicious. I do remember using a watercolor journal from Arteza, and the paper was very weird. Yeah. So, like, I have these moments where people are like, paper's so important. What paper do you use? And I feel like I use paper, like, it's fine. But the truth is that there is really bad paper out there. So So if you are using really bad paper, then invest in good paper. Like if you can notice, and anyone can notice if they're using really bad paper. If you apply paint to your paper and you ever see any kind of like rolling up of your paper, bobbling up, switch paper before you do anything about your watercolor. Switch paper to something better. Higher cotton content usually helps. So 100% cotton is great, but you can get some pretty decent papers that have 50 or even 25% cotton. You will find with papers that have less of a cotton content that you can't put as many layers down without the layers like lifting up the previous layers. But you can work with that. You can work around that. Heavier paper, like a lot of the cheapest papers will be a 90 pound or what is that in GSM? 220, I want to say? No. Do I have this backwards? No, yeah, 220. Or if you have like you can go up to 140 pound or 300 GSM paper. That's kind of like the standard good paper. I sometimes use even heavier because I like putting in a lot of layers and I like having a long working time on my layers. So I get paper sometimes it's like a board. Can paper be pressed again? The 300 had a weird square dimple pattern like on old undershirt. I think that if you're seeing like a dimple pattern, that might be the, I'm not sure if that's the press or sometimes there's the sizing, like the gelatin that they put on the paper. Sometimes that goes funny in our humidity cycles. So like because it gets really humid in the summer here and then really dry and then really humid and then really dry. If you have paper for a year or 3, you might tend to find that separates, like it tends to liquefy a little and then separate and then liquefy a little and then separate. And then when you try to paint over it, you can end up with like a weird spotty pattern or like areas that don't have as much, that don't seem to hold paper. Oh, like the actual texture of the paper. Okay, so it's not the like on Prismas. I might be more trouble than it's worth, but I do know of a couple of botanical artists who wanted to paint on really, really big paper that was only available in cold press, but wanted a hot press finish. And what they've done is, and apparently it works, is you take like a smooth stone, like an agate polisher or like, one of those mail opener things, but with a somewhat curved edge, and you just hand rub out the texture of the paper. And apparently that works. And you can get a really smooth finish on your paper if you're willing to put in that effort. And that's way more effort than I think I'm ever going to be willing to put into my paper, but apparently it's possible. Strathmore, that was the brand. Right. Yeah, Strathmore 300 series, I think, is another one of those you might find that your paper just bobbles right up. Yeah, I suspect that you might find that if using that on like Strathmore 300, you might find that you just tear up your paper rather than flattening it. My understanding was this was done on very heavyweight cotton paper, and that it worked for that. And that it was an absurd amount of effort to go through even for that, but this was when what's it? You know the corpse flowers, the giant aeroids that bloom like once every 12 years or whatever. There was an artist who wanted to paint that at life scale. And so she got double imperial or quad imperial. It was huge. She got this huge paper and she flattened it out. And then a couple of other artists have copied her since. So it is possible. It just seems like an absurd amount of work. They often use cellulose, right? Yeah, I believe so. The giant flowers in the rainforest? Yeah. That's the ones. So it was a Singaporean artist who was trying to do one of these for, I think it was like a national, like a native plants exhibition. So she did that originally, and then Jess Shepherd used the same technique for some of her larger recent pieces. So yes, it's possible, depending on the paper. But it seems like an absurd amount of work. I don't think that just applying pressure, like I don't think that you're going to likely be able to apply the right amount of pressure using like home materials, unless you have, I don't know, a steel press. Like if you got a full-blown metalworking workshop, then maybe. Although at that point I would question a lot of things, but all right. I think I'm actually gonna put an end to this because I really need some food. I don't know where my husband is right now with the dog. I'm glad they're out having fun, but I have some stuff to do. So I think that's about it for me today. Thank you so much. Do I have anyone here who can throw in some Discord links? Stephen, can I make you a mod? One moment. Actions. Add moderator. Stephen, you are now a moderator. Can you throw in a Discord link, please? Anyway, thanks everyone. Thanks for joining me. I hope to see you next week, and I hope to be back on a more regular schedule in the new year. I'm making some changes to make that possible. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.